Hi, everyone. I'm Matthew DeSantis.
And I'm Kaylie Shapiro.
And welcome to this pace projection of the Belmont Stakes
at Saratoga.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this pace projection video for the Belmont Stakes coming up here in a couple of weeks. Myself and Kaylie Shapiro here with us. And listen, you probably just saw us 24 hours ago in our early preview of the Belmont Stakes, but as we were recording that, Kaylie, some breaking news took place, and that is Gosger is out. It's looking increasingly unlikely that Rodriguez is going to make it. And, we really wanted to come back and talk a little bit about what the pace might look like in this Belmont Stakes, because it looks like it's really wide open at this point.
Yeah, it's funny. Yesterday, we were literally discussing how, the presence of Gosger certainly helps the pace, because then Rodriguez won't be lone speed if Rodriguez were to go. So definitely big breaking news as soon as we were done recording that Gosger's out. Obviously, was looking forward to seeing him, but it's going to be great to see him later in the year. And we've done some digging for sure and found some other horses that are working that could be pace presences if they happen to go. So I think it's likely we'll see some other speed signed on for the Belmont.
You have to think, and this is one of the things that's, I think, really interesting, and we'll get into who might end up coming to the Belmont Stakes as seeing this as an opportunity, because here's the reality is Rodriguez has not worked since early May. He has been scratched or removed from consideration, I should say, by Bob Baffert for the Kentucky Derby and the Preakness. He has had no works since that work at Churchill Downs before the Derby. So it is hard to imagine that he is going to be going anywhere, especially the Belmont Stakes, anytime soon. Gosger, as you said, is out. He is going to be pointed towards either the Haskell or the Jim Dandy next, per trainer Brendan Walsh. So he's not going to the bench or anything, but he's just going to, Brendan's going to take his time with that horse who you and I both think have a lot of potential. And he's going to, pop up in one of these other races later in the season. And so as it stands right now, the probables list is horses like Heart of Honor, Journalism, Sovereignty, Baeza, and Hill Road. Well, none of those horses like being anywhere near the lead. So if it was those, it might be a New York turf race at this point, where we just go around at 50 seconds to the half. But it is, it's so you have to imagine that some of these connections look at the probables and go, hey, we got to inject some speed in here. If you're somebody like Chad Brown and you have Hill Road, if you're somebody like John Sheriffs and you have Journalism, if you're Godolphin and you have Sovereignty, you go, hey, we need to get a little bit of speed in this race. And similarly, some trainers might look at this and go, hey, there's an opportunity to steal this race on the front end. If nobody else is going, why not put one of our horses in here and see what happens? So it's just a really interesting dynamic.
Yeah, definitely. And like you said, you'd imagine that these trainers are going to look at the race and they're going to have to send a stablemate. Definitely Baeza has stablemate Westwood that was sent in sort of as a rabbit before for Baeza. So you imagine that they can try similar tactics here. And if other speed ends up, signed on, draws into the field and the horse is in over its head, then they can always scratch. But I think that you'll definitely see some more entries from, people that already have horses in the race, like Godolphin, you mentioned, has East Avenue, who's one of the quickest of, this crop. And if he's there with just one other horse, to sit off of him, then we do have speed signed on. But yeah, for sure. It's definitely hard to imagine that, the trainers aren't going to see this and they're going to say, all right, we got to get, Westwood ready. We got to get, and it's hard to imagine also that Bob wouldn't send anyone. Obviously Rodriguez is hard to imagine, but Barnes is working.
To that point, let's dive in and take a look at some of the horses that are under consideration. And when I say under consideration, really it's you and I sitting down and looking at the work tab and seeing who are some of the top speed horses in this 3-year-old group. And I think here's the important thing to keep in mind when we're looking at some of these names. The other big race for 3-year-olds this weekend for the Belmont Stakes Racing Festival is the Woody Stephens. And that is a race that very commonly horses that cannot get the classic distance of 1.25 miles will cut back and come into the Woody Stephens, which is why that is one of the deepest races, along with the H. Allen Jerkins, that you would tend to see for the 3-year-old crop, because it's all these Derby horses who realize it's a bunch of practical jokes and into mischiefs usually, who all realize, hey, we can't go a mile and a quarter. Let's do 7 furlongs. Let's do a mile. This is where we're going to excel. So, some of these horses that are on the list, maybe they end up running in the Belmont Stakes Racing Festival weekend in the Woody Stevens. But there's also the possibility, like I said, if these trainers look at this race and go, hey, you know something? Under the right conditions, maybe we can get a mile and a quarter under, at this race. So let's start with East Avenue at the very top for Brendan Walsh. We saw this horse, almost take him gate to wire in the Bluegrass, was up near the lead in the Kentucky Derby, faded back obviously late. But this is a horse that you have been high on since he was a 2-year-old, and I have too, to be honest. And he is a talented horse. And if nobody else is up there, he very easily could be dangerous going this distance.
Certainly. And I think obviously looking at his pedigree, he comes from the same female family as Cody's Wish. You'd imagine that, looking at his pedigree, really that a mile might even be his best distance. But
sure.
This is a horse that still, has run competitively leading up into the Derby as well as in the Derby. I mean, obviously he ran a huge race at Keeneland as well. And we saw just how fast he was. You'd imagine, I mean, even if, deep down they know that this horse might be better suited doing something. I mean, Godolphin owns this horse, and they're going to call a lot of the shots. So it's like, obviously they have Sovereignty going. It would help Sovereignty a bit to have a horse like East Avenue in there to either press another front runner. I mean, he's probably going to be up on the lead if he goes, but, to ensure some pace. So I think it's pretty likely that we see East Avenue show up, and obviously he's been working. So that's also a positive
Exactly.
sign.
No, exactly. He's back on the work tab as of May 18th. So that's good to see. So clearly he's in good condition coming out of the Kentucky Derby, could be under consideration. You have somebody like Louis Saez who is going to ride Gosger. He could easily go up on a horse like East Avenue as well. Again, riding for Godolphin would not be shocking to see a horse like even somebody like Manny Franco, who does a lot of riding for Godolphin, could be up on him up here in New York. So East Avenue, a horse you figure. You mentioned he ran some really fast fractions in that Bluegrass because they were hell-bent to get to the front that day, and they just put blinkers on. And if he slows those fractions down even just a little, he might have actually held on and won that race over Burnham Square, who we should say came back to run, I thought, a pretty good 6th-place finish in the Kentucky Derby. So he lost to a horse that really did acquit himself rather well, even though I think he's got distance limitations at a mile and a quarter. So I thought that race came back better than people thought it was going to come back.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought this horse had a ton of ability from the beginning. Very fast horse. So you'd imagine, I mean, the race he ran at Keeneland definitely was, his big one. But even back when he was 2 years old, always super competitive. So it would be good to see a horse like this show up, especially if it means more pace is signed on. So I guess we'll see.
Absolutely.
But looks pretty good, honestly, for his chances.
I think so, too. You have to imagine Godolphin is taking a very strong look at this. And knowing that Brendan is resting Gosger and, the whole 9 yards. So it seems like there's a lot of smoke maybe to where East Avenue might end up here in the Belmont. Another horse. Now, listen, you mentioned it's hard to imagine Bob Baffert's not going to be sending a couple horses up to Saratoga for this racing festival. I think a lot of them are going to go to the Woody Stevens because he's got a deep crop of sprinters, I think. But the horse that's most intriguing to me is Citizen Bull out of this group because he can do 2 turns. Now, can he do a mile and a quarter? I have my doubts, but he can get a mile and a 16th. I think on the right conditions, he can get a mile and an 8th. And here's the other thing is under the right conditions, when nobody's pressing him, I think he can run all day. So he's back on the work tab as of May 16th. He's by far and away the most proven router out of these Baffert horses that we have with Madicat Road and Barnes here. Again, he seems out of all of them, if anybody's going to come, and he stayed at Churchill Downs, if anybody's going to come, it feels like he would be a logical candidate.
Definitely. And it's not like he got banged up any which way in the Derby either. If anything, he was banging some other horses up in the start. So
yes, he was.
and he did keep him at Churchill. Obviously, he's working at Churchill. So that's also a good sign. You'd imagine, I mean, I think his chances are pretty good. Bob, he's going to have to send someone to the
I
Belmont.
agree.
And I think out of all of them, this horse is pretty logical. I also think Barnes is another pretty logical option as well. Whether these horses would dominate going shorter, maybe, but I think it's pretty likely we see one of the two, if not both, show up in the Belmont.
And Barnes obviously is the $3.2 million sale from a couple of years ago. Very well thought of horse who absolutely dominated one of the prep races earlier this year, and then really faded badly in that Santa Anita Derby, and hasn't really been seen since. Just got back on the work tab, so we'll see if Bob gives him maybe one of those traditional big 6 furlong works next time out. That can maybe be a little bit of an indication of, hey, maybe he's already back and ready to run. I think it's maybe a little bit more of a long shot that Barnes ends up running in a 2-turn race. I think it's more likely he would come back in the Woody Stevens. But listen, you have a horse like Matticat Road, who's coming out of a second place finish in the undercard and the Pat Day Mile. And so maybe he's probably pointed to the Woody Stevens, but he's working as well. So you have, and Matticat Road's an interesting horse because he can rate a little bit. At least as opposed to some of these others. So he wouldn't need the lead in a way that some of these others do. But it's hard to imagine the Belmont Stakes is not going to have a Bob Baffert horse in it. And these are some of the ones that we think have the best chance at showing up that Saturday. So now another gentleman who has a couple of horses who could end up going, and he doesn't have any other interest in the race in terms of he doesn't have a closer that needs pace like some of these others that we're going to talk about. But you think about the Belmont Stakes, you think about Todd Pletcher. He's got a couple of horses in Crudo and Disruptor who are fresh, working, or just raced. In the case of Crudo, just winning the Sir Barton on the Preakness undercard. We talked about him yesterday. He's got a phenomenal pedigree to go 2 turns, justify out of the deputy minister mare. Disruptor, sired by Gunrunner, you figure also has that ability to get 2 turns. He's been shipped up and is working up here as of May 15th. So those are 2 possibilities as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think Crudo, it would be good if that horse showed up. Obviously a very lightly raced horse as well. Maybe a bit in over his head going to this type of spot right after that. But it's definitely pretty likely or possible. But I think Disruptor out of the 2 is, a pretty logical horse that could end up going to the Belmont. I know obviously that horse finished, I think, like 5th in the Florida Derby. Never really got going that day, if I'm remembering correctly, but that horse did show some speed when he broke his maiden. So possibly if, he showed up, that's another possibility of some pace. But I think out of the 2, Disruptor is one that honestly seems like this could be a logical spot for them to point to next.
It could be. And one of the things I'll say about Disruptor is, he's obviously had a little bit of time off. He got back to training right after that Florida Derby. He actually got back to training. That Florida Derby was on March 29th, and he got back to training on April 18th and trained again on April 25th. He had about 2.5 weeks off maybe, and then he comes back to train at Saratoga on May 15th. So he should be he should be pretty fit. He had a little bit of a gap there in his workout. Maybe, who knows? Maybe the horse spiked a fever. Maybe the horse just, who knows, was a little sore coming out of one of the works. And, but, you give him another 2 weeks and, he's a horse that certainly could be ready. I remember Todd, because he was talking about Grande as well, who that horse hasn't worked since the Wood Memorial, or hasn't worked since that one time at Keeneland. And, when he was talking about Grande, he said he was less concerned about Grande handling the Aqueduct surface and the kind of deeper 1.125 track up here at Aqueduct. And he was a little more worried about a Disruptor handling a deeper track and more distance. We'll see. I think, again, Saratoga can be pretty kind to those types of horses. And, again, front end speed here. You can get out there up front. Another horse that has good early speed. Crudo, obviously, good early speed. Just won that Sir Barton in gate to wire fashion. Now, a couple of trainers who have an interest in making sure there is pace is one Chad Brown and one John Sheriffs. Chad Brown has, of course, Hill Road, who is a deep closer that you, Kaylie, got to see up close in person in that Peter Pan, and you were really impressed by. Jeremon's no slouch himself. He just beat Cornucopian last time out in an allowance race. He's front end speed too, and that could really help Hill Road.
Yeah, I like Jeremon. That horse ran, one of the a pretty competitive figure if they were to point. I'm sure they could send him to the Haskell or point towards something like that, or send him to something at Monmouth maybe in the meantime, and he could dominate all of those spots. But I think it's pretty likely that, this horse has the ability to point to a start like this next. I mean, he did beat Cornucopian, who obviously you can have your opinion on how the horse maybe was rushed a little bit, but he's still a good horse with a lot of expectations. And Jerimond, he beat him, and it was pretty unexpected, but I think he got like a 98 for that effort. So that's very competitive coming in here. And obviously Hill Road as well. And Chad Brown dominates at Saratoga. He knows exactly what he has to do to ensure that there's pace for Hill Road and that it could set up for his horse. So, and Hill Road, I mean, that's a horse that has really never gotten pace. So you'd imagine that they're really hoping for that, because that's when that horse might put in his big one. Not saying that he can win if there's pace, but he might run a way better race than we've seen from him before, if there is. So
I agree with you about that. And, it's going to be interesting to see whether or not he decides to come up here. Again, a lightly raced horse, but one who has the pedigree certainly to handle the 2 turns and the 1.25 mile distance. Uncle Mo out of a Tappet mare. So plenty to like there for the handling the 10 furlongs. And then the other one is obviously Westwood for John Sheriffs. And this is a horse that just worked on May 16th. We saw him be entered in the Santa Anita Derby, and that was largely to help Baeza, or I shouldn't say Baeza, journalism, to make sure that Westwood could get a little, Baeza, I'm sorry. To make sure Baeza could get a little bit of pace. But, this could be another one where Westwood is entered, and honestly, it would help journalism too. But it would really ensure a little bit more pace, because here's the other thing, and we could talk about Westwood a little bit in a second, but here's the fascinating part is, if none of these horses go, and it's really the horses we just mentioned, these kind of 5-6 horses that are all off the pace runners, Baeza might be the fastest out of all of them. But I don't know if Baeza wants to be on the lead. I don't know if John Sheriff wants that sort of a horse to be up there. I think he'd rather have that horse running at a target. So that's why we talk about having some of these other horses in the race to not just be the pace, but just to let these other horses have a target to run at, because that's the way they've been trained to this point.
Great point. I mean, you'd imagine, I don't know if I'm wrong to think this, but maybe that's why they had Westwood in the Santa Anita Derby in the first place, because that was their concern, that, Baeza needs a target to have his best shot. So maybe it's similar here. And I think the question really that's hitting me is, like you just said, if Baeza, out of all the closers, whoever's the fastest of them, you'd imagine that they still want pace in the race rather than being up on the lead, because journalism and Sovereignty have kind of proven that they can get the job done without all the things that they need, like a setup or pace or anything. Sovereignty, especially in terms of pace. So you'd imagine that these people, they're thinking it doesn't make a difference for me. I mean, I want my horse to have pace to run into because he needs that. So I think that it's pretty likely that we see these trainers enter in horses for that reason, because no one wants to be closing next to Sovereignty or journalism into no pace. I mean, I don't really think, based on what we've seen, and certainly not after he did enter, a rabbit for Baeza, that's a possibility. I think Baeza's, a bit of a wild card here. We don't really know just how good that horse is yet, but he could be a bit more pace dependent than Sovereignty and maybe even journalism.
I think it's one of those things where, I think Baeza would probably benefit from being able to be maybe more forwardly placed and being able to get the jump on some of these horses. Obviously, the less pace there is in this race, the more it's going to favor horses that are a little bit closer to the front end. And so a horse like Baeza, a horse like journalism, who has more tactical speed than maybe he's been able to show, you could imagine could lay, as close as maybe third or something like that if these horses, maybe one or two of these horses get entered. But, it obviously, again, it's going to be interesting to see how this kind of all shakes out over the next 2 weeks. But I think the big thing and the big takeaway is really, as of right now, there is very little pace signed on in this race. And I think you have to, if you're thinking about where is this pace going to come from, you really do have to look at the connections that are going to benefit from the pace. And so looking at who else Chad Brown could enter, looking at who else John Sheriffs could enter, looking at who else, maybe even Michael McCarthy could enter, although I don't think he really has anyone in that space. And then looking at who, as you pointed out at the very top, Godolphin could enter. Those are the horses that seem to make the most sense. And, and then Todd, listen, it's hard to imagine that Todd Pletcher and Mike Rapoli are not going to have a horse in the signature race of New York. So those are, Mike from Queens is going to have a horse in Saratoga.
He owns Disruptor, right?
He does indeed. Yeah. So, yes, Mike is going to make sure he's in the paddock for the Belmont Stakes. I have a hard time thinking that Mike's going to pass up that opportunity. But, exactly. Trust me, it's more entertaining for us if he's there.
But my question, I'm kind of curious what you think. Will it really matter for you? Like, say, for example, that we have Lone Speed in East Avenue. I mean, I think you said that's kind of the one out of that list. If any of those,
I think it makes the most sense.
Yeah. Which I pretty much I agree with that. Will it really matter for you if, say, for example, there's just East Avenue and all these closers, when we've seen what Hill Road has done with no pace, we've seen what Sovereignty has done with no pace, and then obviously, journalism
too.
So dominant out of this group. I'm just wondering, how much weight do you think that you're going to put on that? I
think it would depend on who else has entered. I think if it's just East Avenue, then I could see a situation, and you get somebody like Louis up on that horse. I don't know if I would pick him to win as an upset, but I could see him being in my top three. I'll tell you that. Like I could see that horse. I could see whoever gets entered, even Citizen Bull. If Bob puts Citizen Bull up there and nobody else runs and comes, or a horse like Westwood or something like that, maybe a lesser speed horse or something, or Disruptor or something like that. I could see that horse sneaking in the trifecta at a bigger price, because I agree with you. We've seen what, Sovereignty can do. We've seen what journalism can do. Those horses, I mean, maybe you think the wear and tear on journalism just ends up taking a toll after the 3 races in 5 weeks. Sovereignty's fresh. We know what he's capable of doing. I'm less bullish on Hill Road than you are, just because there's a big difference between beating Captain Cook and McAfee as opposed to beating this group.
Oh, I agree.
But he has every right to move forward, and you're right, he never gets pace. So, if he gets a little bit more of an honest pace, though, if he's also running against Lone Speed, that's divvying out modest fractions, what sort of pace does he get? And do we know he's a better closer than Sovereignty or journalism? That's where I think, again, I think that's where maybe the Lone Speed is able to hang on for third or something like that. And then, the other factor in all of this, of course, and we'll have to wait until it gets closer to the time of the race, is track conditions, and just how the track is playing. Last year, the track was very speed favoring. And so that's something to keep in mind. And, do we get a sloppy sealed track? Do we get a dry fast track that's got a big speed bias? You just never know. And those things can change our opinions on the day of, in some instances, in terms of how things play out. So, it'll be interesting. I hope we see East Avenue, Citizen Bull, maybe Disruptor, maybe. I hope we see a couple of these horses take a shot. It would certainly ensure a better pace. It would ensure a deeper field, and I think it would ensure a little bit more competition there as well. So it should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I mean, I know for sure if Baffert has Lone Speed, that's always pretty dangerous. Hopefully, I think there's a pretty good shot East Avenue shows up. I'm pretty hopeful for that. Not to get too ahead, like I know anything or anything, but just based on, the fact that he's back working regularly and Godolphin owns him, hopefully he shows up.
It's a little bit of like connecting the dots, and it certainly makes a lot of sense. And the fact it's a Brendan Walsh horse and Brendan's scratching Gosger out of there, skipping Gosger, it makes a lot of sense. And listen, it's going to be interesting to see who all comes up. And a horse that you had mentioned to me before we started recording, hey, the coach might bring American Promise. What the hell?
Yeah,
why
who
not?
knows? Like, we can't even forget about that horse, because he obviously, he ran horribly in the Preakness. It was bad, but at the end of the day, I mean,
It's
the
the coach.
horse might be feeling great, like, and they might send him. I wouldn't be
And
shocked.
a
So
horse that, again, I think does his best work when he's up on the lead by himself or in the clear in the second position. And, if nobody else is going, the coach will go. Why not? And so,
yeah,
he'll run his
Caldera's not
horses back.
working, but
Yeah, so we'll see. Oh yeah, Caldera's not working. Yeah, I know. That's the other one that could have been up there potentially. But yeah, listen, it's going to be interesting to see. Make sure to stay tuned to NYRA Bets for all of our content here for the Belmont Stakes at Saratoga. All the other great stuff. We're going to have a Met Mile preview. We're going to do an early one of those. We're going to start getting the Contender Series ready to roll, and so can't wait to do all this other stuff for you. But Kaylie, appreciate you hopping back on with me to talk about the breaking news and figuring out where the pace is going to come from in this race, the whole 9 yards.
of course, yeah, I'm so excited for the Belmont. Like, literally, it's like a countdown every single day, and it's just gonna keep getting more exciting as more news comes out, etc. So
Yeah. No, especially as we get, a little bit more clarity on the Woody Stevens field, more clarity on some of these turf races, more clarity on the Acorn. By the way, who's back working?
immersive, yeah.
Uh-oh.
Who's put in like 3 works now, hasn't missed
Yeah.
a beat. She's gonna put in her 4th, I think, tomorrow. So
Uh-oh.
I mean,
her stablemate better watch out. Good cheer, buddy.
Yeah.
Not getting too comfortable being the top filly anymore.
I know. Imagine we get to see those two go head to head this summer. There's really going to be nothing better than that. I mean,
Yeah.
besides maybe the Met Mile and the Belmont, I mean, I cannot wait for those two go head to head throughout the summer.
No, it'll be interesting to see what Cox does with those two and whether he lets them run against each other at any point or whether he tries to keep one down at Churchill and one up in Saratoga, which I'd imagine he'll probably do to start things off. But you'd imagine those two, if Immersive comes back the way she was as a 2-year-old and even more improved, those two are on a collision course for the Breeders' Cup Distaff for sure, if not a race sooner than that, like the Cotillion or something like that. So, or the Coaching Club America Oaks or a race up at Saratoga this summer. So that's exciting. There's a lot of exciting news. We got a lot of things to talk about, but we got to stop there for now. Kaylie, thank you again for joining me. I appreciate it. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode on NYRA Bets. For Kaylie Shapiro, my name is Matthew DeSantis. Wishing you a great, profitable day at the races and reminding you, friends, it's now post time.